Good afternoon, Chairperson.
Good afternoon, Ms. Niekerk. It seems to me like it's 1 o'clock. Is that what you want to draw my attention to?
That is correct. It is now 1 o'clock. We do have a quorum.
Good. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, Chairperson Peter Murray.
Good afternoon, Honourable Murray. I'll give the other members an opportunity to also introduce themselves.
Good afternoon, Chairperson Matlodi Maseko.
Afternoon, Deirdre Bartman.
Good. Thank you very much, honourable members. Honourable members, welcome to this meeting of the Standing Committee. Oh, sorry, Honourable Maran, welcome. My apologies. And I also see Honourable Mvimbi. No, no longer. Thank you, honourable members. I wish to welcome you all to the Standing Committee on Agriculture and Environmental Affairs and Development Planning. Our topic for today is the improvement of the safety standards in the transporting of farm workers. And as you will see from some of the presentations, there have been a number of horrendous accidents over the last number of months involving some of our farm workers. I also wish to welcome to the committee those that are going to present to us and a number of their colleagues. And I would appreciate it if you're going to present or if you're going to speak, that you just introduce yourself then at that stage. Honourable members, before we get to the agenda of today's meeting, I just want to take you back to last week's meeting of this committee. During that meeting, Honourable Bartman raised a point of order, and I indicated that I would like to consult also with the standing rules, and that we would be coming back to this matter today. And I have been in discussions since then with Honourable Bartman, who raised the issue, as well as with Honourable Murray. And Honourable Murray indicated that he would like to just briefly address the meeting in this regard. Honourable Murray, over to you.
Thank you so much, Chairperson. Chair, during the Agricultural Committee meeting of the 2nd February, verbal jabbing and sparring occurred between myself and Honourable Member Bartman. Now, she claimed to be confused about what I was saying and asked me to explain myself. I considered this as an invitation to good verbal sparring and jabbing at each other, as often happens in parliamentary debates. I then offered to school her. Now, her reference to confusing, I looked it up and it means muddled, in disarray. Whereas schooling, the Oxford Dictionary says, means to guide and to inform. Now, while I therefore do not concede that the word schooling is derogatory or insulting or even sexist, I nevertheless decided to withdraw it, as Member Bartman, the receiver of what I said, perceived it to be of such a nature, and it was never my intention to pass any derogatory remark or insulting towards the honourable member. It was just friendly jabbing and jostling each other, but in normal way it happens in parliamentary debates.
Thank you, Honourable Murray. Thank you for that and for explaining yourself. Honourable members, I would just like you all to always keep in mind that we are public servants, that the public is looking at us, quite rightly, often critically looking at us, and that we've got a decorum that we would like to maintain. And I therefore ask you all to please also, when we address each other, address the other party in such a way that he or she would know that we don't call each other only honourable, but that we also treat each other as honourable members. So thank you very much for that, Mr. Murray. And that then brings us to the item on the agenda, a very important item, one which may require of us to have more than one meeting. We've invited a number of people that I believed would be able to add value to the discussion. I've been taught that if you want to solve a problem, you must be able to understand the extent of the problem, the root cause of that problem. And therefore, we invited a number of traffic experts, accident analysts, etc., to share with us first the rules of the road pertaining to the transport of people, particularly on open vehicles. And then secondly, also people that might help us to understand what causes these accidents. And then also we've invited the department, and they quite rightly in their presentation drew my attention to the fact that road accidents are not the only threats when you are transporting workers to and from or between home and work. And that and then lastly, I've also invited Agri Western Cape, because I was actually led to believe from one of our members that Agri Western Cape has, over the last number of months, communicated with their members, and that they have tried to develop a protocol or tried to spell out to their members what are the limitations regarding the transport of workers, also in this time of the COVID-19 pandemic. So, ladies and gentlemen, without much further ado, I want first to welcome Mr. Kenny Africa. Mr. Africa, as you know, is quite well known amongst us as members of the committee. Honourable Maran, I'll come to you just now. Mr. Africa retired last year as the Provincial Chief of Traffic, and I invited him to come and share with us not only the rules pertaining to the transport of workers, but also in his experience, what he observed to be contributing to accidents and circumstances which endanger people, or particularly people being transported. As I've said, this may well be, it's for the committee to decide, not the only meeting on this very important topic. It may well also be that this topic be passed on to the Transport Committee, because we do know that it's not only farm labourers that are being transported to and from workplaces and home, but also construction workers and people in other industries often find themselves in similar positions. So I already want to say now that if anybody that may be interested in this subject and that believe that they could add value to the subject of road safety, that they approach our procedural officer after this meeting and just indicate what their field of expertise is or what the input would be that they would like to make to help us all to understand the problem better, but also hopefully to come to a situation where we will be able to really make a difference in the life and death situations that many people face daily on our roads. Honourable Maran, your hand was raised. Is it still there? You're welcome.
Still there, Chair.
Yes, please.
Thanks, Chair. Good afternoon to all members and everyone present in this meeting. Chair, before we go to presentations, I just thought it's important for this meeting to note that your office, and you correctly stated that your office have communicated with a number of or with individuals and organizations to come and do a presentation. But it's also, Chair, important to note that Agri Western Cape, for instance, who represents the employer side, don't represent all employers within this province. and that we have basically failed to speak to NAFU, AFASA. That's the one. The other one, Chair, we have also failed to engage with Labour because we're going to speak about them without them, and they not having a voice within this particular meeting to basically convey what they experience on a daily basis on the back of trucks and what they have to go through, because it's them basically that dies on a daily basis, or when accidents happens in these particular instances. And I think, Chair, it's a slap in the face of Labour not to be invited to this particular meeting. It seems that they should just accept whatever been discussed in this particular meeting, and whatever the outcome will be, just for them to be spectators and to wait on whatever the outcome is and whatever what's agreed upon. So, Chair, you have mentioned now that this might be the first of a number of meetings that will take place. To consider, Chair, if there will be a follow-up or a next meeting, that Labour, the voice of workers and the voice of black farmers in this province, AFASA and NAFU, also be present in this, or the invite be sent to them, whether they want to make a presentation or whether they want to participate in the discussions that basically going to unfold in this particular meeting and in future meetings that will take place. I think it's just important, Chair, for this meeting to note that particular issue. I thank you.
Thank you. I don't know if my
Chair,
microphone is on. Yes. Yes. Is it Honourable Marais?
Yes, sir. I would love to just, courtesy, sir. I just got the news that load shedding will be in operation from 2 o'clock till 4:30. So if this meeting is going to continue beyond 2 o'clock, we'll all be cut off, sir. I just thought I'll bring it to your attention.
Good. Thank you. Thank you, Honourable Marais. That's a very important point that you've raised, and I actually forgot to raise it. It's not been on my notes. You're correct. I actually got notice that phase 3 load shedding will be have been introduced from 1 o'clock, and I do hope that members have checked their schedules. I have certainly checked mine. Where I am, we're only expecting load shedding from 10 o'clock tonight. So hopefully your chairperson will not disappear. And I do trust that many of you have got backup systems by now. So honourable members, if your chairperson should disappear, please exercise some care or some patience. Just accept that you've all been given a quick 5-minute break, and I will then switch to another Wi-Fi router or one working with cell phone signals, and hopefully we would be able to finish our meeting. Honourable Marais, what I've heard from you is that in your area, you may be affected at 2 o'clock and that you may perhaps not have a backup system.
That's quite right, sir, but I'm sure that the meeting will do quite well without me.
Thank you. We're going to miss you, and hopefully you would be able to follow afterwards on YouTube, as many people in the public domain are currently follow this meeting. So with that, I want to immediately switch over to Mr. Africa. Mr. Africa, thank you very much. I knew when we approached you that you always had this wonderful relationship with the media and with the provincial parliament, and that if it would in any case be, or in all circumstances be possible for you to assist, that you would come and assist us. And I believe from Ms. Niekerk that you've already addressed the issue of technology and how to bring your presentation onto our screens. Mr. Africa, welcome, and I hand over to you.
Good afternoon, Honourable Chair. Can you hear me?
We hear you well. Thank you very much. We also see you.
Thank you. Good afternoon to yourself and also the honourable members and everybody that is tuned in, colleagues. Good afternoon to all of you in this very important gathering. As you know, I'm Kenny Africa, and I've been within the traffic services for over 46 years. After I retired last year in July. But seeing that the time is so limited, I will immediately kick off with my presentation. if you can just give me a second to get it on the screen.
Good. Thank you, Mr. Africa. Just while you are bringing your presentation onto our screens, Ms. Nika did a calculation. If each presenter presents for about 10 minutes, and that will allow us about 30 minutes for questions and answers. And then there will be some 20 minutes left before 4 o'clock for resolutions. Taking into account the risks now of this phase 3 load shedding, I think everybody would appreciate if we could finish slightly earlier. But as you've said, this is such an important topic. It would be a pity if we had to rush because of external factors beyond our control. Mr. Africa, I see your presentation on my screen, and I trust all the other members are able to see that as well. And please continue.
Thank you, Honourable Chair. I will immediately go to my first slide. Yes, okay. Yeah, my first slide is just a quote by our late President Nelson Mandela, who once said that what counts in life is not the mere fact that we have to live. It is what difference we have made to the lives of others that will determine the significance of the life we led. Now, the reason I brought this quote to you today is for the mere fact that we need to make differences in other people's lives if we want to make a success. And especially with the problem at hand, our farm workers being transported on bakkies and trucks, and the dangers that we experience on a daily basis. So much so, let's start off with this meeting today and say to one another, we all can make a difference in other people's lives. Now, the reflection of a few most recent crises involving farm workers in the Western Cape. The Durbanville crash, which is all known to all of us, where a truck crashed and transporting plus minus 80 farm workers on the R44 near the Durbanville off-ramp. There was also 2 people seriously injured, 37 or 27 moderate and 51 minor injuries. 2 ambulances and rescue vehicles were dispatched to the scene. The other crash was the one on Toes River, between Toes River and the Dorings. And in this crash, it was a head-on collision between a cargo truck, resulted in 6 farm workers losing their lives. Now, fortunately, I was present at this accident where the 6 people died the early morning, where they were in a head-on collision with another vehicle. Then we had the accident at Canetvlei, where one woman got killed, another 14 were injured, where this truck also transported 37 farm workers, lost control in very heavy rain. The unsafe way in which farm workers are being transported on a daily basis, and if I say on a daily basis, this is happening every single day of the week. On the first photo, this is how the farm workers are transported. The second one, you can see at the back of the truck, there's people hanging at the back of the truck, and the truck is fully loaded with people. So dangerous. Selected remarks after crashes is one said by Billy Claassen, the Executive Director of Rural and Farm Workers Development Organization, who said that we have always maintained that farm workers are the poorest, most marginalized and at-risk workers, laboring under difficult working and living conditions. Then also by the Minister of Transport, Minister Madikizela, who also said where an employer arranges transport for workers performing essential services, such a farm worker, he or she, must ensure that no more than 50% of the licensed capacity of that vehicle or vessel is exceeded. All directions in respect of hygienic conditions and the limitation of exposure to persons with COVID-19 must be adhered to. And this is also the same that Minister Madikizela spelled out with regards to the COVID regulations. In Cape Town, Agriculture, Land Reform and Rural Development Minister Thoko Didi Disa has called for the farming sector to look at the issue of transporting for employees after a 30-year-old farm worker was killed near Worcester on Monday. Now, we do have regulations with regards to the transporting of people on goods vehicles. Circumstances under which persons may be carried in goods vehicles. Regulation 247 is very clear that no person shall operate on a public road a goods vehicle conveying persons unless that portion of the vehicle in which such person are being conveyed is enclosed to a height of at least 350 millimeters above the surface upon which such person must be seated. B, at least 900 millimeters above the surface on which such person is standing. And then we also got a third one, and that is the regulations with regards to overloading of goods vehicles, where we can take a goods vehicle to the nearest weighbridge to make sure that those vehicles are not overloaded. We, in the Western Cape Province, the Provincial Traffic Services under the Department of Transport, got 9 weighbridges throughout the Western Cape Province. There is 13 provincial traffic centers, and I think plus minus 26 local traffic centers throughout the Western Cape Province. Now, the routes that trucks are traveling, for example, the Hex River Valley routes, the Dorings transporting farm workers between Toast River and the Dorings, and Worcester and the Dorings. Other routes is Grabouw, Klapmuts, Wellington, the West Coast, Citrusdal, Saldanha, and those areas. Now, the comment is that one single entry to most of these areas makes it very easy to regulate, to police, and also to monitor. For example, if you take the Hex River Valley, people coming from Toast River, there's only one route that they can get into the Hex River Valley, and that's the N1 from Toast River to the Dorings. If you're coming from Worcester, there's only one route leading to the Hex River Valley, and that's the N1 from Worcester to the Dorings. Suggestions of what could be done. Traffic law enforcement to monitor the movement of farm transport on the regular routes in the mornings, as well as in the afternoons with proper record keeping. Traffic law enforcement to weigh trucks with passenger loads with the use of mobile screening mats. Now, each and every weighbridge, all 9 weighbridges within the province, they got the mobile screening mats, which they can take out anywhere in the province, put it on any road, and they can measure the weight of any truck. And if a truck is overloaded, that truck will then be directed to the nearest weighbridge. Road safety management need to implement awareness events and educational programs in conjunction with agricultural organizations. Interaction with agricultural sector agencies to ensure that this matter receives high priority on the agenda. Change legislation in order to impose liability on farm owners for the unsafe transportation of farm workers, notwithstanding the charges against drivers who make themselves guilty of reckless and negligent driving. Now, I'm glad to see that Mr. Yasir Ahmed is also present. Hello? Mr. Ahmed is also present, and I would like to ask of Mr. Ahmed He is the representative of the Western Cape Province at the RTMC, the Road Traffic Management Corporation in Johannesburg, to take this matter up with the RTMC so that the necessary legislation can be changed with regards to liability and also the safe transport of farm workers from one place to another. Now, in order to stop this unfair and unnecessary carnage of the most vulnerable and most marginalized in our communities, it is imperative that a strict, no-nonsense approach be taken and that adequate resources be committed to deal with this dilemma. Chair, in conclusion, we all know what the problem is. We know what routes they take. We know what time of the day these trucks are on our roads. And our provincial traffic services renders a 24/7 service. Our provincial traffic services need to join hands with our local traffic services to make sure that they can stop this ongoing nonsense on our roads. This will cost no extra money. It will cost no overtime. This can be done on their normal shifts in the morning as well as the afternoons. As I've said, they need to monitor, police, enforce, and educate the farmers as well as the farm workers. Do it every day, from Monday to Friday. Stop these trucks when they leave the farms or when they enter the farms. And if a truck is overloaded, if it is so that the farm workers' lives are in danger, then they have to deal with that issue. Minister Madikizela stated it very clearly. With the COVID-19 regulations, it makes it so much easier for the law enforcement officers to deal with this problem, because 50% of the normal capacity should be loaded on a truck or a bakkie. They need to adhere to the social distance of 1.5 meter, wearing masks. So if traffic officers sees these problems and they know that it is indeed dangerous, then they can deal with it on the spot and get in touch with agricultural Yanni and his team so that they can arrange meetings with the farm owners where the Department of Transport, the provincial traffic services, can then educate the farmers, making sure that they transport their workers in a safe manner. You know, in my time when I was at traffic, I had a few best practices that I implemented. One of these best practices was the weekend alcohol blitzes, where provincial traffic services every Friday and every Saturday evening from 8 o'clock till 4 o'clock in the morning had alcohol blitzes, checking people for drunken driving. And this message went out to the people that so many people moved over to public transport when they are at pubs drinking, and make sure that they do not get behind the steering wheel of a motor vehicle. People didn't like it. Some people hated me for doing that, but we saved hundreds and hundreds of lives on our roads by implementing this best practice in the Western Cape Province. So I believe that, Chair, that we must come up with another best practice, and that is to secure the safety of our farm workers on trucks and bakkies until such time that Mr. Yasir Ahmed can take this up with the Road Traffic Management Corporation to change the regulations to make truck owners responsible and also make sure that the people on the trucks are indeed safe. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Africa, and thank you also for recognizing Mr. Ahmed's presence. I see he's also in the meeting. I'm grateful to see his presence. Unfortunately, it seems to me as if our initial inquiries regarding their accident analysis units and so on was misunderstood. and therefore we then invited you, Mr. Africa. But thank you very much, and thank you for all the trouble that you went to prepare that presentation. Honourable members, it's now over to you if there are any questions that you would like to ask to Mr. Africa. I do anticipate that there may be some overlapping with the presentation from the accident specialists from Stellenbosch Traffic Department as well. But if there are any questions at this point in time, please indicate by raising your hand. And the first hand that I'm recognizing is that of Honourable Marais.
Thank you, Chairperson. Mr. Africa, one thing is really come to my attention. This problem don't only affect farm workers, it affects people in the cities who also, I mean, contractors, building, especially building contractors. That's the way they transport their workers, plumbers, the bricklayers, etc. You can't have, are you going to have a one-size-fits-all situation? Now, when it comes to monitoring, I know about the weigh bridges. Yes, you weigh it, normally that is for goods, not for people, but when farmers sort of don't want to make use of rail transport, they tend to overload because it's a cost that comes down. The more you load onto a truck, the less trips you can make, and it's cheaper than to do it by rail. But how do you monitor this? Do you think it's time that when you apply, you have a bucket and you want to transport people, that a special permit must be needed, first of all, to make sure you comply with all the regulations governing the transport of people, and that should be an added license on the vehicle. If a traffic stops you, traffic officer, he can see whether you are licensed to transport people and whether your vehicle complies with all the regulations about how many people and the total weight compared to your tar or gross weight of the vehicle itself, whether the people can sit or where must they stand, the height of the bars around the truck or the vehicle to make sure that standing passengers have support. These things must surely form part of a license application with the vehicle being tested to see does the vehicle comply. Just to say you must do it and not knowing whether the vehicle is suitable for it, you are going to be in a situation you won't be able to monitor all this. Lastly, what did you think of a wider look at this? Where did this all come from? This come from the fact that farm workers don't stay on the farms anymore. They live at home and got to travel 5-10 kilometers to their workplace. We don't have agri-villages. Agro-villages is overseas. People live close to the farm or on the farm itself. They don't have to be transported over such long distances. Don't you think that the problem is much wider than the comfort on the back of a bakkie? What if it rains? You're also going to add another regulation. The people must have umbrellas. It's going to get ridiculous. Why don't we get to the bottom of this thing? It is, where does the labor come from and how do they get to their work? That is the problem. Thank you.
Thank you, Honourable Marais. Honourable Maran, I recognize your hand.
Chairperson, sorry, Chairperson, before Member Maran, can I address something?
Honourable Maseku, is that a point of order?
Chair, it's not a point of order, but technology sometimes, so the pressure on our system, on our data with the video. So only a person that talks, if we can be the one that switch on the video, we will appreciate that, Chair.
Good, thank you, Honourable Maseku. I appreciate that. And in the worst case scenario, there is an option. If you go to the 3 dots, turn off incoming video. But let's ask then only the presenters because we would like to see them. I'm sure you wouldn't like to switch that off. So Honourable Maran, you're up, and then Honourable Smith.
Thanks, Chair. I will keep my video off. Chair, first, let me welcome the presentation made by Mr. Kenny Africa. Chair, I really appreciate the bold statements that he made, and I believe that you would have made the same bold statements if it would be still in the service of the department. So I really appreciate that. Mr. Africa said that, and I make this statement by saying we should stop this nonsense. He called it directly, we should stop the nonsense. We know what the problem is. We know when the trucks will be on our roads, what times, and what routes. And it seems then, Chair, that the problem lies with us, who are not able to enforce one law or the regulations. And he was saying that the national state of disaster and the lockdown regulations makes it so much easier to enforce either the law or the regulations. Then one would ask the question, why is it not happening? Is it an enforcement issue? Chair, at the beginning, I made this statement, and I say I want this meeting to note that the failure to invite labor and also other employer organizations. And Chair, and I've noted that you have not said anything about that, but that is fine, Chair. Look, Chair, we all know, for instance, that trucks are not permitted to transport workers, but the regulations allows them to do so. And correctly stated by Mr. Africa that when it comes, for instance, to seated passengers, the rails should be a minimum of 350 millimeters. When it comes to standing, it's 900 millimeters. But the regulations doesn't speak about numbers, how many should be. So farmers argue that even if there's, and they use the average weight of 68, let's say 70, for that matter, that if there is, for instance, 100 workers on an 8-ton truck, Chair, their argument is that the weight of those 100 workers does not exceed the total mass the truck is allowed to transport. And when we argue in that fashion, we argue as if humans are goods. That's basically what we argue. We are arguing as if humans are goods. And that's something that needs to be changed. I've said earlier on that us who are sitting in this meeting and discuss the issue of farm worker transport don't know what they experience at the back of truck on a daily basis and how those trucks swerve from the one side to the other side, because people are standing and they are moving. It's not a bag of rice or a bag of sugar that we are transporting, but it's human lives that they are transporting. And this nonsense, as said by by Mr. Africa, should stop. It should stop. From what I pick up on what he was saying is that it's an enforcement issue. It seems that our police services, it seems that our law enforcement and national traffic services, provincial traffic services, basically refuse to enforce either the law or the regulations. So I appreciate basically, Chair, the bold statements made by Mr. Africa in terms of that particular issue. We cannot continue to transport workers in such a fashion. Thanks.
Thank you, Honourable Maran. You were a bit quick for me. I was hoping that the discussion and the debate would be left until we've had all the presentations, and that we as a committee would then hopefully decide on a way forward. So we're now currently with a question and answer session, particularly to Mr. Africa. So Honourable Smith, if I could ask you that at this stage, you use the opportunity to ask questions for clarity of Mr. Africa, and then once we've gathered all the information, then hopefully at the end we would have a highly meaningful discussion on this. So Mr. Honourable Smith, and then Honourable Maseko thereafter.
Thank you, Chairperson, and apologies for just being a bit late. No, Chair, well, that direction I'm covered. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you. We will certainly give you an opportunity, Honourable Smith. Honourable Maseko, questions from your side?
Thank you very much, Chair. Chair, like you indicated, I agree with you that we need to invite all stakeholders to make sure that we get to hear their contribution towards this. Now, Chair, I tend to believe from the annual performance plan, one of the priorities in the Department of Transport and Public Works is road safety management. And I know for a fact that Mr. Africa was championing that also as the department is trying. But monitoring and holding people accountable always comes with a package in making sure that things they do happen. Now, what I want to hear from maybe Mr. Africa is, during his tenure as he was heading that department versus now as he's sitting and watching from the borderlines, is there anything that he identifies that we can improve that monitoring and holding maybe the farmers accountable for the safety of their employees? And as he stayed there in that department for a very long time, what were the shortfalls of trying to empower the users, which is the farm workers, to make sure that they can have that conversation continuously with the farm owners for their safety? Because this is such a very sensitive topic that it talks about the loss of lives to the farm workers, or even sometimes the farm owners as they drive the trucks. But the loss of life, it doesn't matter whether it's 2 or 3, the loss of life is a loss of life. One is too many for it to happen, let alone the numbers that we are seeing that they happen, whether being in the building construction or the farms themselves. Now, why we are doing this as an oversight members is to try to be proactive in making sure this doesn't happen again. And we need to be empowered. We need to get as much information as we can. I agree with the other members that we need to get all the information from all the stakeholders. And I agree also that we need to seriously, members, get as much information from Mr. Africa as we can, so that when we do the resolution, or if, like he said, that there need to be a policy or regulation that has to be in place for us to be able to hold the department accountable to make sure that monitoring is done thoroughly, and at the times or any other suggestion that can come from the members gets to be implemented correctly, so for the saving of their lives. So let's try to focus on giving us that information, because I'm really, from my side personally, I would love to have more information to have a resolution of the way forward to try to nip the problem before it can happen. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you, Honourable Maseko. Mr. Africa, from my side, you've been silent on things like the public driver's permit, on regular testing of vehicles for roadworthiness, etc. Do you believe that there might be merit in, say, for example, requiring from drivers of these vehicles transporting, but sometimes large groups of workers, to be regularly tested. I think the public driver's permit requires also an eye test. People need to have a police clearance, or is that an irrelevant requirement for the circumstances that we are looking at? The second one is just in Europe. I know that after a number of bus accidents, later on they followed some court cases, and some of these buses, and I'm referring to an accident in the Franschhoek Pass, I'm referring to a school bus that started rolling back and eventually ended up in a river with loss of school children's lives. I think it was in the vicinity of Neisner. That you know, afterwards it was found that these vehicles, although in both cases they were supposed to be public licensed vehicles with undergoing regular testing, that their brakes were not functioning as they should. So again, if you could help us to understand, is it driver error? And if it's driver error, if you could be a little bit more specific, is it lack of concentration? Is it reckless driving? People not acknowledging the importance of you know, the cargo, and if I use cargo, please understand that in the correct way, the importance of the human lives that have been put in their hands. Is it the overloading that you refer to, leading to tires that burst? So do we need more regular tire inspections? If you could just perhaps help us to understand the extent of the problem a little bit more by expanding on a few options that might be available in future. Even recommendations where we might recommend to farmers to voluntarily send their drivers to obtain their public driver's licenses or permits, or to have their vehicles regularly undergo testing at the nearest roadworthy testing center. Mr. Africa, I don't see any other hands, so if you would be so kind to respond to those questions, please.
Yes, can you hear me?
I hear you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Honourable Chair. I would like to start with Honourable Member Murray's questions with regards to the fact whether this is only farm workers, or the issue is not farm workers only, but it's a issue throughout our country. People being transported on bakkies and trucks, not only to farms, but also in the other industries. It is indeed so. But I would like to say to Honourable Member Murray, whilst we are sitting with the current regulations, we need to make sure that our farm owners and the people who's driving those trucks adhere to those regulations. When it comes to how many people can be at the back of the truck, it is very difficult to say how many people need to be at the back of an 8-ton truck. But when officers stop these vehicles and the truck looks like it is overloaded, then they need to take that truck to the weighbridge or make use of the mobile screens to make sure that the vehicle is indeed overloaded or not. And if overloaded, then our officers need to deal with those drivers. So, Honourable Beret, I suggested that Mr. Ahmed take the matter of the regulations that need to be changed, that he need to take that up with the RTMC. Now, that is not a quick fix. It won't take a month or two. That normally take up to a year before you can change any regulations. In the meantime, we need to police this matter. We need to make sure that our officers stop these vehicles, check these vehicles, make sure that they are roadworthy, make sure that they are not overloaded. The pictures that I showed to you where people are hanging at the back of a truck, that's not on. If officers see that, then that truck must be removed from the road. The owner must be informed and make sure that that driver of the truck are charged so that he don't do those stupid things again. And we need to make use of the media so that the public out there can contact all our number of our provincial traffic services in the Western Cape. Report these bad behaviors to all our numbers so that our officers can do something about it. But until such time that these regulations are not changed, we need to enforce the law. I hope I answered your question, Mr. Murray.
I do not have permission of the chairman to respond, sir.
Okay. Sorry.
No, there will be an opportunity if members feel that their questions have not been answered. So, Mr. Africa, if you could continue.
Okay, thank you, Honourable Chairperson. Honourable Maseku, Member Maseku, with regards to the improved safety of our farmers and also the empowerment of farm workers, you know, the only way that we can deal with this matter is to get agriculture on board. Sit with them around the table and make the necessary appointment with the different areas to educate our farmers and our farm workers. This is what I did through the years when I was still there. Yanni is also here today. He can echo on that. I also invited him to a provincial road traffic management meeting in Tilbach last year, where I gave him the opportunity to address us and we could share stuff with him to make this problem that we experiencing so much less. So we need to get the agriculture people in the different areas on board. And in the Department of Transport under provincial traffic, they also have a department that deals with road safety. And those road safety practitioners can go out to the different farm communities and educate those farmers so that they can make sure that they are within the boundaries of the law. I can just give you a simple example. In the beginning of the COVID-19, way back in March last year, we had meetings with our farm workers and our farm owners, and we educate them with regards to the 50% capacity that they need to load on their trucks. And the traffic officers from the municipality and from the provincial traffic services, when they stopped a vehicle and it was clear that that 50% was not adhered to, they would not let that truck proceed with his trip. And another truck was sent out to come and fetch the people that was on the truck that was more than the 50%. I don't know what happened to it. I'm no longer in service, but I can still see that trucks are overloaded with people. They are not adhering to the 50%. And all I'm asking is, let's get back to basics. We need to get the agriculture people and the farm community on board so that we can address this problem. If we can get back to basics, then we can stop this nonsense because innocent people are losing their lives. Honorable Maseku, I'm immediately going to go over then to the chairperson. Honorable Chair, with regards to trucks on our roads conveying or transporting people, you must bear in mind it is still a truck, it is still a goods vehicle. And when the truck is more than 3,500 kilograms, then the driver of that vehicle must be in the possession of a PDP, which means that he need to be tested every year, every 6 months. And the vehicle that they drive must be in a roadworthy condition. And that's why I'm saying, Chair, that our traffic officers must be hands-on
when it comes to the inspection of trucks on our roads, especially trucks conveying passengers, farm workers, making sure that those vehicles are in a roadworthy condition. Then the media need to be involved in this so that we can educate the people out there. If a motorist drives behind a vehicle where people are hanging and there's no traffic officers nearby, make use of all our numbers of provincial traffic services in the Western Cape, 021 946 1646. That's a 24/7 number, and our officers or the provincial traffic officers are there to assist anybody who's in need on our roads. Even if you have complaints about a truck that is overloaded, that is driving dangerously, that is driving reckless or negligently. And the other question that you've asked with regards to the competency of the drivers of those vehicles, where a driver transporting goods or people at the back of a truck and he drives reckless or negligent, then our officers must deal with this driver, take him off the road, arrest him, and bring him before court. That's the only way how we're going to change the attitude and the behavior of our motorists out there, Chair. I hope I've answered your question.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Africa. Honourable members, are there any follow-up questions from members to Mr. Africa? Honourable Murray?
Good, Chair. Thank you, Chair. Mr. Africa, thank you. You've been very clear on your proposals, and I can see that if a man's hand is tied behind his back, whatever he does to defend himself, he must say it's fine because he can't do anything without his hands being loosened. And maybe that's the position you're in. But I want to say to you, I asked you whether when you give an annual license to a person who owns a truck or bakkie, which is also to be used to transport people, it is just a renewal. There's no inspection of the truck. There's no renewed license to make sure the vehicle is in a good condition. So shouldn't that be added? That if you are going to transport people on this truck and not only goods and cattle, that there must be a special permit issued. And that permit must be issued on condition of the roadworthiness of the truck or bakkie in line with the regulations that has been formulated. At least then we will be able to see whether when the traffic department stops such a vehicle, he sees that none of these regulations has been observed, yet they have a license that says the vehicle conforms to the regulations. We know who the corrupt officials are who issued that license or the permit. So I just want to that one and the other thing which is not on your plate, and I don't think you must respond to it, but it's a matter of distance to be traveled by workers to the farm. Should that play a role in the granting of such a permit, or is there a limit to the distance people will be allowed to be transported as such? Thank you.
Thank you, Honourable Murray. Yeah, I think this is why I said right in the beginning, I'm so glad that Mr. Ahmed from the Department of Transport is also with us. And I believe that Mr. Ahmed will indeed take this up with the Road Traffic Management Corporation with regards to when a person, as you rightfully said, has a license to drive a truck and passengers on the truck, making sure that passengers are indeed safe and how many people are allowed to be on that truck. But I think Mr. Ahmed will really take this up with the Road Traffic Management Corporation, because this is an issue that's a burning issue, not only in the Western Cape, but throughout South Africa. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Africa. I see a number of hands. Can I just point out to our guests as well, this is not a public meeting. It may well eventually lead to a public meeting. And for those that joined late, I just want to reiterate what I said at the beginning of this meeting. At the end of this meeting, the committee will decide whether we need to gather more information, and that anybody that believes that he or she or his institution, her institution, would be able to add value to the conversation and to our understanding of what should emerge from this discussion, you're most welcome to contact our procedural officer. A number is on the WCPP website, Ms. Shireen Nikerk. So please, and thank you for your understanding of this. I recognize two hands, Honourable Maran and Honourable Smith. Mr. Africa, I'm going to ask that they both ask their questions to you and that you then respond. I see Honourable Smith's hand has just been lowered. But Mr. Africa, sorry for pushing you, but my question is, buses need to go for roadworthiness tests every 6 months. Yet we have had more than one occasion that I know of where these buses were, after accidents, found to have worn brake pads, etc. So when you respond to the other questions as well, won't you just respond, does it mean that the roadworthiness tests are not worth it? Is it something that we should consider to have these trucks and bakkies tested more regularly? Or would it be a waste of time? Because it seems to me then, in the case of buses, as if we've not always had the desired results. Honourable Maran, I recognize your hand.
Chair, yes, thanks. I think in my comments that I've made earlier, there was a question, basically, which is not being responded to, is that, Mr. Africa, if you look at the current situation, are you saying, or do you think there's a failure in enforcement? Because we're saying that we exactly know what the problem is. That's the one. Secondly, tell us about at the back of a vehicle, the transportation of workers together with goods. Just tell us about that, because we have seen in some cases where there's a concrete mixer and bags of cement or a tractor at the back of a truck or a bakkie, whilst there's also workers at the back. Just tell us about that and what the regulations is saying about that. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Honourable Marang, with regards to the enforcement issue, it is indeed so that this need to be, in Afrikaans sê hulle, dit moet opgeskerp word. Want, it happens too often that these trucks are on our roads, like the pictures I showed you. That was quite often. And that is not supposed to be. If law enforcement would have been done in the correct manner on a daily basis, then they won't take those chances. So I believe that they need to do enforcement. And if there is, which I believe in, failure with regards to enforcement, then those people need to be charged, and the farm owners need to be contacted so that we can get agriculture on board, so that we can deal with this matter from a law enforcement side or point of view. So definitely we need to do much more when it comes to enforcement. If you do not enforce the law, then people will take chances, they will do things that endanger other people's lives, and people will die on our roads if those vehicles end up in motor vehicle accidents.
Thank you, Mr. Africa.
Just with regards to your second question, conveying or transporting people, passengers and goods on a goods vehicle. There's nowhere in the Act or in the regulations that it states that you are not allowed to transport passengers on a goods vehicle. And here I would also ask Mr. Ahmed to take this up with the Road Traffic Management Corporation and see how can they rectify this problem so that it will make it so much difficult for any person who's conveying or transporting passengers and goods in the same goods vehicle. I hope that will answer your concern.
Mr. African, my question regarding the value of regular roadworthiness tests, if it has been proven
Chair,
in some cases not to have the desired effect.
Yes, Chair. The situation with the roadworthiness of vehicles, trucks and buses, those vehicles has to come for a roadworthy test every 6 months. And you said something about buses that was in gruesome crashes. And after investigation, it was found that there was fault with the brakes or there was tires that was smooth. We need to take cognizance of the fact that there is so many corrupt things going also on. The bus or the taxi would go through for the roadworthy test today. And I know of cases where the Hawks are currently investigating testing stations who issued licenses to vehicles that was never at the testing station. So we also need to deal with the corruption issue to make sure that when a vehicle are tested, that it's been done in a correct manner. And if a driver or an owner of a bus found that his tire or his brakes is defective within that 6 months, then the driver need to make sure that those defaults are repaired.
Good.
And
Thank you, Mr. Africa.
that is why, Chair, that is why enforcement is so crucial. Officers need to enforce the law when it comes to the roadworthiness of buses, trucks, and taxis on our roads on a regular basis.
Good. Now, thank you very much, Mr. Africa. Our procedural officer, which is of great value to us, has just pointed out to me that we've really run over time. Mr. Africa, thank you very much for your presentation, for the answers that you've provided. I do hope that you would be able to stay on for the next 2 hours for the remainder of this meeting. I don't know if you would like to give me an indication of whether that would be possible for you or whether you're also subject to load shedding in your area.
Chair, let me put it to you this way. Road safety is so near my heart. So I will stay on for the next 2 hours.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I do recognize the hands also of Honourable Smith and Mr. Ahmed. Mr. Ahmed's name has been used on a number of occasions. But I'm asking you, Honourable Smith and Mr. Ahmed, wouldn't you mind, I will put you on first after the next presentation. I think Traffic Chief Gavin Solomons may be burning to make his presentation because I think some of the areas which he's covered in his presentation or that he would like to cover have already been referred to. So if you wouldn't mind, Honourable Smith and Mr. Ahmed, I'm going to give Mr. Gavin the opportunity to now first address us. Traffic Chief Solomons, if you could beam your presentation onto our screens, and then with Mr. Africa being around still, if there are questions that members would like to pose then to Mr. Africa after they've seen Traffic Chief Solomons' presentation, please feel free to do so. And with that, Mr. Solomons, I want to welcome you. People have asked why have we invited you. I must now admit I'm a former councillor and alderman of Stellenbosch Municipality, and I do know that Stellenbosch Municipality many years ago used to have an accident analysis specialist. And when I inquired whether Stellenbosch has still got a capacity to analyze accidents, I was informed of the affirmative. And with that, Mr. Solomons, I wish to say thank you very much to Stellenbosch Municipality through you for also making your time available, and we look forward to your presentation as well. Over to you, Mr. Solomons.
Honourable Chair, honourable members, committee members, good afternoon and thank you for having me here. I'm just going to go through the slide. Is the presentation visible for everybody?
It's on our screens. Thank you very much. You can please proceed.
You can see myself and Mr. Africa were the same scene. Let me just go to the outline. We will start, Chair, with the transportation of farm workers, the management control of transportation of farm workers, the focus on transporting farm workers, drivers, risk mitigating against human and productivity loss, transportation of workers on and off the farm during the course of employment. There's a risk of loss of product due to injury or damage to vehicles, and then we have a reference section. Coming with the previous question is from Honourable Member Marais. We look at the sectorial determination 13 for the sector. Transportation must be made available between the farm workers' place of residence and the workplace and the commencement and conclusion of the farm workers' shift. Therefore, all vehicles used to transport workers must be fit for purpose, safe and comply with road safety legislation and regulations, as Mr. Africa alluded earlier on. It must be roadworthy, it must be registered, it must be licensed. The mechanical condition of the vehicle must be checked regularly in service as required. Vehicles must be checked before the trips against documented checklists that is being kept on file, and faults must be repaired promptly. Vehicles transported, the employees must be stationary when employees are mounting or dismounting. Vehicles must be free of obstacles and obstructions that might cause employees to fail or trip during mounting or dismounting. Now we look at the management control of the farm owner must manage and control the vehicles and drivers that transport farm passengers. I'm talking about the workers. The type of vehicles used must be monitored and amount of passengers must be logged in a logbook. The vehicles must comply with legislation. We talk about the National Road Traffic Act and the National Land Transportation Act to ensure passengers' safety. Safety enclosures must be meet legal and safety requirements as per the OS Act and the National Road Traffic Act as well. Passengers must be safely seated or standing with rails to hold on. The driver must ensure that the vehicle is not overloaded, as the capacity and load will influence the drag and shifting of the passenger load. The driver or foreman must be trained in first aid, and first aid kit must be on the vehicle, and the driver must also have reliable cell phone with the emergency numbers and the farm manager or the owner number on speed dial. This is just the use of tractors on public roads for transport workers must be avoided, as this vehicle is too slow for general traffic and according to legislation. Tractors must never be used to transport workers in bad weather before sunrise and after sunset. There must be a list of name of workers to be transported, the responsible driver and the responsible driver. The transport vehicle provided must be fixed seating, a canopy against weather and seat belts. The vehicle is driven by a qualified and licensed driver. Workers must use the internal farm mechanism to report bad and dangerous or drunk driving by the drivers and the farm management agents immediately and firmly. Then we talk about the drivers. Truck, bus or tractor drivers play a key role in the transportation of farm workers. The National Road Traffic Act of 1996 stipulates the requirements for drivers. The driver is required to be fit and equipped with driving license issued by the Traffic Department. The National Land Transportation Act 2009 stipulates there is a charge for the transport. If you need an operating license, the drivers need to have a professional driving permit, referring to the PRDP. If transporting more than 12 people, both these permits are issued by the local traffic department. When an accident or incident occurs in the workplace, important to report the incident as part of the employee's compliance with the requirements of the Occupational Health and Safety Act and the Compensation of the Occupation Injuries and Diseases Act, the QUEDA Act, Section 22. Drivers are responsible for transporting people to and from farm must be appropriately trained and skilled and must adhere to the farm's transport policy if there's a operating procedure and the relevant legislation and regulations. The mitigating
So, sorry, Mr. Solomons, can I just ask from the other members, is it only me that is having connectivity problems and that finds Mr. Solomons' voice to be distorted?
Yeah,
we
lost him.
Okay, so it's not only on my side. Mr. Solomons, I don't know if you can hear me, but
I can hear you, Chair.
Yes, your connection has gone bad. And I think you just need to repeat the last minute, what you've said through the course of the last minute, please.
Okay.
You're
Chair,
back.
thank you very much. Thank you. Let me go to the previous slide. I was referring when an accident or incident occurs in the workplace, it's important to report the accident as part of employees' compliance with the requirements of the Occupation Health and Safety Act and the Compensation for the Occupation Injuries and Diseases Act, the QUADA Act, Section 22. Drivers responsible for transporting people to and from farms must be appropriately trained and skilled and must adhere to the farm's transport policy or standard operating procedure and relevant road legislation and regulations. What is so important, Chairperson, is a twofold, a double-edged sword. The enforcement side and the obligation from the owners of the farm owners and the farm managers for them to do compliance as well, that we don't have a situation where they coming on the road and that we sit with the situation that we have to take out the stick and give them a hiding. But this is twofold, the presentation, to say what is their obligation towards the transportation of the workers and what does the law say. Then the mitigation of human productivity loss, there's a real risk of injury or death to incompetent, untrained, unlicensed driver, a reckless driver, or a driver that's under the influence. Fatigue is another problem, Chairperson. The worker is most of the times the driver as well working excessive hours, and after work you've been asked to convey or transport these employees or farm workers to their residence. There's this risk of damage to vehicles, the loss of product, skilled workers, productivity time due to accidents involve transportation of vehicles must be mitigated against it. Only drivers must be used after their driving records and driving license have been evaluated. Each driver is assigned to a particular vehicle because each vehicle's got his own way how he reacts when there's a load on the back, when there's human capacity, so that each driver's allocated a vehicle or they know how the mechanism of the vehicle operates. With the functionality of the vehicle, the farm foreman or manager must constantly emphasize the practice of safe driving, transportation practice, as far as the responsibility to check the safety of the vehicle before it's been used, report any damages found, the regulation of vehicle license and services, and check the fuel and lubricates of the vehicle that it doesn't break down in traffic, that places drivers and passengers at risk if the vehicle is breaking down in traffic. The most common cause of serious injuries and fatal injuries on and off farms involving moving or overturning of vehicles. Transport in and around farm workers' workplace needs to be controlled to protect workers and to prevent damage to vehicles. The employer has a duty to ensure that workers who transport on and off farms are safely transported, and the measures have been put in place to reduce the risk involved. There is a risk of injury, even death, due to a number of possible factors involved: unsafe transport methods, workers sitting on the edge of the trailer, resulting in falls from moving vehicles, workers climbing on and from vehicles and slipping due to mud under their feet, vehicles driving too fast due to production pressure or sheer negligence. There's a risk of damage to vehicles' property if there's an accident. Now, although there's nothing in the that relates, as Mr. Africa alluded earlier, back to transportation of workers on the farm, the Occupation Health and Safety Act places the duty of employees to maintain, as far as reasonable, practical, a working environment that is safe and without risk to the health of farm workers. Farm workers must all take reasonable precaution over their own health and safety at work. They must follow precautions and the rules about safety and report any unsafe circumstance or accidents as soon as possible to the team leader or the supervisor. Workers must be made aware of potential dangers as the rules relate to vehicles and transport on and off the farm. Workers must be seated in trailers or in the vehicles where they use the transportation and not sitting on the edges. Workers must wait for the vehicle to stop, and that is by most of the time when the vehicle is not stationary and is still moving, they're getting off and on the vehicle. Drivers of vehicles such as light delivery vehicle lorries used to transport workers on the farms or off the farms, they must have a valid driver's license in the PRDP and every requirement. The drivers must be aware of dangers of slopes, wet and muddy roads on the farm, beware on and off the farm speed limits and not exceed them. Tractors, drivers must receive formal training. And then I have a list of the reference of farm workers. The human rights have an article on the human rights of farm workers, a guide to the law and best practices in transporting farm workers in the South African horticulture industry, section 13 I refer, insofar as the sector is concerned. The images that we got is from the Albury pictures. And in the National Road Traffic Act, the National Transportation Act, and then we have the Land Road Traffic Regulations, the Labor Relations Act we look at, the Basic Conditions of Employment Act, as the sectorial determination again insofar as the transportation of the workers, the Occupation Health and Safety, the Compensation Occupation and Injuries and Disease, and then we look at the Road Accident Fund as well, the International Labour Organization for the Health and Safety Standards. Chair, that is mine. Sorry that I rush it, because I believe, Honourable Chair, that we only have 10 minutes. My apologies to the committee and the members that I run so fast through the presentation.
No, thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Solomons. Thank you for the work that you've put in to prepare this presentation. And I'm grateful to see that, you know, you've put the emphasis on a number of issues which we didn't know after our first presentation. And that is the value of multiple presentations. You've drawn our attention, for example, to the Occupational Health and Safety Act. And I'm sure there will be questions about some of the issues that you've raised. Honourable Smith, I promised you last time that I would give you the first opportunity to ask your questions. Perhaps, Mr. Solomons, if you don't mind, you're welcome to switch off your video camera. It might also help with the connectivity problems that we experienced. So, Honourable Smith, if you're still with us and you would like to ask your question first, please proceed. It seems to me as if Honourable Smith may have fallen off for the time being. Mr. Ahmed, would you like to come in? Normally, you know, the debate is, and the question and answers are left to the members, but I presume that you would like to add to some of the answers that were given already.
Thank you, Chairperson. Chair, you'll of course, we have met through the Standing Committee on Transport and Public Works, on which you are a member, or a member.
Correct.
And this is now another hat that I'm wearing in addition to the Government Motor Transport hat that I normally wear when I'm in front of you. Firstly, I just wanted to add to some of the answers given by my colleague, Mr. Africa. And I have taken note of the recommendations, and I support the recommendations that Mr. Africa tabled, and so too those recommendations by Mr. Solomons. Firstly, if I may just add, Chair, and I'll try to keep it as brief as possible, with regards to escalating some of the recommendations that Mr. Africa made to the national level, and I need to emphasize this, that the legislation that we're dealing with, the National Road Traffic Act and the National Road Traffic Regulations, are national legislation. So when we need to make changes to these pieces of legislation, we use the coordinating structures, firstly at provincial level, to gather inputs, and Chief Solomons will also know the structures of the Provincial Road Traffic Management Coordinating Committee, to get inputs from the various districts, and then we table that at the national forums. And I certainly, Mr. Africa and I have, over many years, tabled a number of recommendations, and it can only be that recommendations to these national forums to change legislation. We've been successful in a few of those cases, but again, as Mr. Africa noted, it does take quite a bit of time. It does help if we get political support from our standing committees at the provincial level to take matters up with their colleagues in the national portfolio committees. So, for example, the issue of changing national regulations that Mr. Africa recommended, and I want to touch on the point that you also made, Chair, with regards to the professional driver's permit, the PDP or the PRDP as it is now known, and also roadworthiness issues, that those two areas need to be overhauled completely. And from the Department of Transport and Public Works side, Mr. Africa and I, when we attended these national forums, lobbied our colleagues from other provinces to really expedite the review of, for instance, the PDP that you've also mentioned, Chair. The fact that it only requires a health check or a health certificate and an eye test, to us, to myself personally, is totally inadequate. There needs to be consequences to bad behavior by especially professional drivers, and they need to understand that it is easy to lose if you do not change your behavior, and it must also be, a professional driver permit must not be a right that everybody can simply tap into. It must be something that is earned and something that you do not want to lose, that will change your behavior when you have that professional driver's permit in your possession. We're very fortunate in this province in that the chairperson of one of these national forums is based in the Western Cape, Advocate Christinus van der Vyver, who is with the National Prosecuting Authority here in the Western Cape. So we've got a very good working relationship with him, and we continue to chip away at getting the changes through in the national legislation, National Road Traffic Act. Of course, we also do have colleagues from the Department of Agriculture here in the meeting. And between our department, Transport and Public Works, there is a close working relationship with our colleagues from Agriculture. For example, when it came to the lockdown and we needed to give guidance to farmers and to traffic authorities on how to monitor the loading of farm workers on the back of trucks, because it is a reality that we need to deal with. There was good cooperation between our two departments. With regards to the question that was asked by Member Mare, and I think Mr. Africa mentioned it in part, and Chair, if I may share a slide, and it is not a slide, it is from the legislation. It also touches on the question that was posed by Honorable Maran. Regulation 247, which I hope you can see, Chair.
We see it.
This part here, when a farmer or a building contractor, as was mentioned by Mr. Mare and Honorable Maran, when they transport people on the back of a truck or a bakkie, no person shall be conveyed in the goods compartment together with any tools or goods except their personal effects. unless that portion in which such persons are being conveyed is separated by means of a partition. So that, I think that the legislation is already there. It just calls for effective enforcement. Chair, we did make the national road traffic regulations available to Shireen, the secretariat, and I trust that members have been provided with copies of the regulations. So that does cover that when people are transported on the back of trucks, that they are not to be sharing that space with heavy equipment or goods for the sake of their safety. Chair, then with regards to a question that was posed by Honorable Maran, Mr. Africa, of course, in his presentation, Mr. Africa was really a champion for road safety in the province until his retirement last year. And he and I co-chaired the committee that coordinated the Safely Home campaign. And when it comes to the safe transporting of farm workers, it cannot just be it's what we call a wicked problem. It requires a number of stakeholders to pull together in the same direction. From government authorities, traffic authorities, engineers who design the trucks, engineers who design the roads, and of course the farmers themselves and the farm workers and the drivers. And we always speak about the 4 E's of road safety: education, engineering, enforcement, and also the legislation, the evaluation part. Those elements of road safety need to pull together. So we need to look at and we are looking at education programs, as Mr. Africa mentioned, through our road safety management unit and in partnership with agriculture to educate the drivers of these vehicles that are transporting farm workers to change their behavior so that they do not drive recklessly. And Chair, unfortunately, of course, we all know that alcohol, I'm talking now in general when it comes to road crashes, and Chief Barre can also bear me out here, that alcohol plays a role in more than 50% of road crashes or fatal road crashes, whether it is a drunk pedestrian or a drunk driver. So that is something that we can fix through changing the behavior of all road users through education, engineering, looking at the modifications that may be required to make it safer to transport people in dignity on the back of trucks. And I want to emphasize that that is something that our department is focusing on when it comes to public transport and transport in general, and also with the infrastructure that our department, Transport and Public Works, is responsible for, is how we make these buildings and the services places of dignity for people who use them. And then, of course, as everyone has mentioned, enforcement, effective enforcement. Mr. Africa made a very good example of a localized area where enforcement planning can be done in a way that you know where these vehicles are, which points these vehicles generally have to pass. And enforcement planning can happen with that in mind. Now, this is something that Mr. Africa perhaps didn't mention in his presentation, but he was certainly part of the initiative when it was created, and that is the development of what we call district safety plans. And we piloted the concept of district safety plans in the Overberg area. Mr. Africa must just correct me if I'm wrong, or Chief Viggy, you must just correct me if I'm wrong there. In the Overberg area, in the Caledon area, and all the stakeholders that could play a part and contribute to safer roads are involved in developing a district safety plan. So if in an area like Overberg, where you have a number of farms and farm workers being transported, we would include farmers or cooperatives in the planning for a district safety plan that will reduce road crash fatalities. Our analysis of that pilot project in the Overberg area, again, I stand to be corrected, showed that that approach to road safety at the district level, where we could look at the granular level of detail and plan with the stakeholders to change behavior, worked exceptionally well. And of course, Chair, you would have been part of the Standing Committee on Transport and Public Works, where we presented to that standing committee the technology that we've introduced in road safety and in enforcement, where we use that technology effectively to also monitor trends, to identify repeat offenders so that we can give warnings to people and then tailor our interventions in a particular area based on solid data that we collect through enforcement authorities and through the cameras that we introduce. Jay, then just another question that you raised with regards to roadworthiness and the sad case that you were referring to. I think the name that you couldn't get to was Reenendal, where the bus had crashed. It had reversed. Its brakes had failed, and it had reversed into a river, and a number of learners had drowned in that crash. Mr. Africa was, in fact, he went out to that area, and it's still something that haunts many of us. Saw photos of that incident. And you're absolutely correct, Chair, that even the vehicle testing environment needs a complete overhaul, because it is also beset with corruption and fraud in that environment. Trucks are issued with, and buses and minibus taxis are issued with certificates of roadworthiness when they in fact have never even been at the roadworthy station. But Chair, to you and the members of the committee, I can assure you that our department has got a very good working relationship with the Hawks in this province and also with the National Prosecuting Authority. There's a operative arrangement that we have where we investigate cases of fraud and corruption, and we've been very successful in rooting out fraud and corruption in the vehicle testing environment and also in the driving license testing environment, where unqualified drivers are found to be behind the wheels of buses, trucks, and minibuses. So you're absolutely correct, Chair, that it is an area that is of concern. But again, we are looking at just the regime for roadworthy testing. And I must just remind, it may have come out in Chief Solomon's presentation, a truck is required to go for a roadworthy test every year. A bus and a minibus must be roadworthy every 6 months, people transporters. And certainly we need to look at identifying what purpose the truck is being used for. And I will table that at the National Forum at the first opportunity. And I think, Mr. Murray, that also touches on the point that you made about the annual license that's issued to trucks, looking at what its use is. But like I said, I just wanted to remind the members that trucks already have to be certified as roadworthy every single year, as opposed to a normal car, the cars that you and I drive, that only gets roadworthy when we actually sell it on again. So already those changes were effected over the last couple of years.
Thank you, Mr. Ahmed. We'll have to move on.
Yes.
And if you don't mind me now giving the members an opportunity to ask questions, honourable members, you are free to ask to both Mr. Solomons from local traffic police or Mr. Ahmed from the Provincial Transport Division. If you could just indicate by show of hands if you would like to pose any questions to them. If no other members are going to ask questions, can I then just quickly ask of Mr. Solomons? Mr. Solomons, I don't know how easy it would be for you to bring your presentation onto the screen again. In this case of this accident at Klapmuts, and I wouldn't like to go into the merits because I trust that there might be an official police investigation. What I do see in that picture, and from the numbers that you've quoted, it seems as if the 50% COVID regulations may perhaps not have been implemented, and which seems then perhaps to a failure in terms of traffic law enforcement. The second thing which I found very interesting was that this truck seems to have been equipped with a very light structure on which the people being transported could sit, as well as a canvas being pulled right over this canopy that they've got on the truck. Now, we know that quite often farmers need to use their trucks during the day to transport goods, and then in the mornings and in the evenings, the very same vehicle need to transport farm workers. Perhaps if you could just tell us what have been your experiences in terms of not only adding to the safety of farm workers, but also to the dignity of them, where they're not exposed to the elements, etc. And then, Mr. Solomons, you also raised another issue again, and I appreciate you also bringing in occupational health and safety and other factors. The mounting and dismounting, the safe mounting and dismounting of vehicles. Quite often these trucks are quite high, and often the people that need to climb onto these trucks are not only young males, but often seasonal workers working in pack sheds, etc. as well. So if you could just perhaps tell us what has been your experience, what do these structures, the benches and the enclosed, even if it's only enclosed by canvas, does it contribute to the safety of the workers on the back of those trucks? And secondly, just in terms of COVID, do you believe that traffic police are aware of the regulations and the limitations in these days regarding the transport of any workers on the back of vehicles? Over to you, sorry, let me just see, Honourable Maran, your hand before Mr. Solomons or Mr. Ahmed respond. Honourable Maran.
Thanks, Chair. I got one question for Mr. Ahmed. Mr. Ahmed was spoken about the issue of taxis and buses, basically transporting passengers who got tested or need to go for checks at the traffic department or testing stations at least 2 times a year. And I was saying when it comes to trucks, it once a year, and I was saying that because we are seeing now, and it's not from now for a very long time, that trucks is also transporting workers. Do we suggest that when you say that we have to relook the national transport regulations, that these trucks should also be tested 2 times a year? That's the question to him. The other question, Chair, is to Mr. Solomons. Mr. Solomons basically in his presentations, and he refers to the sectoral determination 13, and a lot of issues basically that we need to comply with, or farmers need to comply with. And most of the things, basically the word must, it's a must, is there. The question then is, Chair, because if we, for instance, look in Mr. Africa, the accident in last year, April, I think it was on the 6th or 7th, between Tozer and the Dorangs. And I think he will basically agree with me. How then police have to, because I think there was 2 or 3 persons basically who walked from the scene, from the accident scene. They just left. How they have to struggle to get the names of all those who were at the back of the truck. The same basically with the accident that happened on the 4th of January last month, where police and other officials have to struggle to get all the names of those who were present at the back of their truck. And if you look basically to the sectoral determination 13, basically, which says that there should be a list of names of workers who are at the back of their truck. Now, if that's the case, why is enforcement not happening? Who is supposed to check that all these things that you are speaking within your presentation happens? We know, for instance, there's a number of people being transported to farms from Klapmuts in your area, Kloetersville, Franshoek, And so we can mention a number of areas basically. Why is it not happening? Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you, Honourable Moran. In the absence of any other hands, can I first hand over to Mr. Solomons, Traffic Chief Solomons, and then to Mr. Ahmed?
Honourable Chair, yes, thank you very much for the question. Now, coming first to the COVID, I must say our local traffic officers and our law enforcement staff, they are constantly, and I have all the evidence that we sent to the provincial COVID enforcement working group. They do every evening up till 12 o'clock. They do enforcement from 6 o'clock in the evening till 12 o'clock. There's some great statistics that we sent off. There's some enforcement. Insofar as the canvas is concerned, I know in the presentation we say it must be a hard sealed or canopy or a steel barrier protecting in the case where these trucks or lorries are actually rolling, that they create some cover at least for the workers on it. And in this particular case, you will see there was a canvas. So I say that is something that Mr. Ahmed and I, Mr. Africa, have to look at and to bring it on par with the legislation we want to send to national. And then yes, of course, Honourable said the mounting on and off vehicles is a problem, because sometimes you see that a lot of these vehicles is not even stationary. You will find it from ordinary construction vehicles as well, plumbers and that. And people are dismounting from the vehicle, or the vehicle is moving and they're jumping up the vehicle, contribute to the accidents as well to that effect. So yes, that is something that we have to seriously have to look at. And then I'm coming to Honourable Member Marang's question. Insofar as the logbook is concerned, it's to do with compliance. We need to look at a part of my traffic management plan for 2021 is to look at all these matters. I just been appointed in December to this office. So it is contained in my traffic management. So yes, of course, Honourable Marang, where there's gaps is, especially we were referring to the club merge, the Klut as well, and that is all areas that will get my full attention going forward.
Thank you, Mr. Solomons. Over to you, Mr. Ahmed.
Thank you very much, Chair, through you to Mr. Maran. The question around whether trucks should also be tested twice a year. While I'm in support of that, and I fully support that we look towards that, it will require a change in the legislation. And it also will require a way in which the manner in which these vehicles are registered. And it also just triggered in my mind something to do with the PRTPs that I forgot to mention, that when a vehicle is registered, when a truck is registered, it's registered as a goods vehicle to transport goods. And as Honourable Marais also mentioned, we need to understand when that truck is registered that it may be used for transporting of people as well, and that's not currently the case. The legislation simply allows for a farmer or for another employer to use that truck under certain conditions to transport workers, not for gain. So a bus, for instance, is registered as a vehicle that is going to be used for transporting people for gain. And that then immediately means that that vehicle needs an operating license in terms of the National Land Transport Act. But trucks do not, provided that the farmer or the employer, contractor or whatever, is not charging those workers for that transport. In which case that an operating license would be required, and the requirement for the vehicle to be roadworthy twice a year, every 6 months, would then kick in. But just coming back to the issue of the PRDP also, and this is what I forgot to mention earlier on, we do need to also look at the specific PRDP because there are 3 categories of professional driver's permits. The first is for the transporting of goods only. The second is for the transporting of people only, and then for the transporting of dangerous goods. And you do get people and goods. But in some cases, for instance, where someone was found guilty of drunk driving or violence, then the transporting of people is not allowed. And he has a PRDP only for the transporting of goods. And that is where enforcement is also required, because while the person may have a PRDP, that PRDP may be very specific that he or she may only drive goods and not people also, and certainly not dangerous goods. But Chair, coming back to the point that I made earlier on, I believe that the entire arena around professional drivers permits need to be reviewed at a national level. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Ahmed, and thank you, Traffic Chief Solomons. Unfortunately, ladies and gentlemen, I'm failing in managing the time. I would like to hand over to the Department of Agriculture. Now, I don't know if it's Mr. Daryl Jacobs that will be leading the presentation. And if you could start beaming up that presentation, please. Honourable members, what I found interesting on receipt of the various presentations are the various angles and the various pieces of legislation that apply here, and that, for example, it's the COVID regulations, it's obviously safety with road regulations, traffic regulations, but also, and Mr. Jacobs, thank you for that, the Department of Agriculture is responsible, or has been allocated the responsibility for rural safety in the province. And obviously, road accidents form part of safety. We must not only think of safety as violent crime and so on. So over to you, Mr. Jacobs. I think, if I'm correct, your presentation consists of quite a number of slides, and I trust that members can read faster than what we can speak. So if you wouldn't mind just highlighting the salient points in your presentation, I'll really appreciate that. And you're most welcome. We're all ears to hear what you've got to say.
Thank you very much, Chairperson, and good afternoon, members, and everybody else who's part of this. And it's good to engage again with former colleagues, Kenny Africa and Yasir Ahmed, because I spent many years at the Department of Transport and Public Works. I'm assuming, Chair, that the presentation is on the screen. It appears on my side, so I just want to make sure it appears on your side as well.
Correct. We see that. We hear you well.
Excellent.
Please proceed.
Great. I will be very brief, because when you're the third out of a number of presentations, a lot of things have already been covered, and quite clearly. In terms of regulations, a lot has been covered, but I think just by way of introduction, Chair, as to emphasize the range of points that have been made, particularly by Mr. Ahmed and Mr. Africa, that the key in all of this is regulations, legislation, enforcement, education, and certainly around regulations, legislation, enforcement, and even to a lesser extent, education. Those are within the ambit of the Department of Transport and Public Works, and as well as the National Department of Transport. Our role as Department of Agriculture is one of advocacy, as one of consultation, as one of engagement. And so the outline, I'm going to skim over a number of these slides because a lot of it has already been covered, but I would just very briefly look at some of the regulations, some of the challenges, our response to that, the protocol that we had developed in order to make it understood and to simplify what is there. We look at a case study, and Member Maran pointed out the accident last year between Toast River and the Dorans. And I really just wanted to share our response as the Department of Agriculture, some of the proposed interventions, and just one slide on the need to transport agri workers safely and with dignity. And you're absolutely right, Chair. Rural safety is a ministerial priority of the department. We want to ensure safe, protected, and sustainable agricultural and rural environment, inclusive of the well-being of our agri workers. We believe that rural safety is the collective responsibility of all stakeholders, and as a result, and particularly over the last year, we've been engaging with a wide range of stakeholders. We have a stakeholder forum, which Member Maran will be pleased to know, includes NAFU, includes AFASA, and so we want to make sure that our engagement is across the board, as also represented by the Prestige Agri Worker Forum. So there's a number of networking mechanisms that include engagements with DOCs, SAPs, district and local municipality safety forums, and interaction with law enforcement officials and community-based organizations. This slide, Chair, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it, that is really to highlight the fact that workers are spread across the entire province. There is not an area which does not have workers, and so obviously the more widespread the area, such as Central Karoo, the greater the likelihood that workers are being transported on alternative means other than minibuses and taxis, or minibuses, buses, or taxis. And you'll see in Witzenberg, Breda Valley, large number of workers are actually based in those areas. And so since the start of the COVID-19 pandemic, we know that agri workers were deemed essential workers. And it was therefore critical that that producers be aware of all the relevant COVID-19 protocols. Since March 2020, there were a number of regulations that were issued with regards to transporting of people that we as a department that shared with producers, with organized agriculture, our commodity partners, and through our stakeholder forum. But we also know that this is something that has evolved over time. One moment we had level 5, then it drops, and then we go back up. And so it's a moving target. However, there are measures, and we have emphasized this point. The government notices emphasize measures to address, prevent, and combat the spread of COVID-19 within public transport services. I'm not going to focus on the transport regulations because I think Mr. Africa, as well as Mr. Ahmed, as well as Chief Solomons have covered it adequately. So I will just emphasize the purpose of transport regulations is about improved access to hygiene control, making sure loading capacity of worker transport, enforcement of the regulations, making sure that there's sanitizing and cleaning of vehicles, wearing of face masks, that there is social distancing, loading capacity, and permitting that all of those are in place. That is very clear. And the one thing that Mr. Africa has emphasized, enforcement of regulations. We are not, as Department of Agriculture, able to enforce. That is the responsibility of the relevant enforcement authorities. And we have been very clear, Chairperson and members, that if there's non-compliance by anybody, that the due process needs to run its course, the letter of the law must be applied. And we have not, as the Department of Agriculture, had any sympathy when there has been non-compliance. So we do recognize that there are a number of challenges around agri-worker transport. We have received a number of allegations, complaints with regards to challenges of agri-worker transport, issues of overloaded vehicles, non-adherence to social distancing regulations regarding seating, vehicles that are not roadworthy. Many of these have been already covered by Mr. Africa. Agri-workers are not wearing safe face masks, inconsistencies in or different interpretation of regulations and directives with regards to transportation during the COVID-19 period. And then on the other side, we've also received complaints around excessive fines and penalties for alleged contraventions of regulations. And our stance has been, give us the evidence why you believe it's excessive, because if you're not complying, then the law must really take its course. We have, out of all of these challenges, we had attempted to develop a set of protocols certainly against the backdrop of COVID-19, to make sure that that was communicated via email, different WhatsApp platforms to all stakeholders, as well as through our stakeholder forum. And we believe our collaborative effort, and Mr. Ahmed spoke to the fact that Transport and Public Works and the Department of Agriculture had worked together to develop a transport protocol to assist producers in terms of transporting workers safely and without incident. And there's a number of committees where SAPs have been part of, district safety forums, the traffic authorities. Again, we, while our role is one of advocacy, consultation and engagement, we have attempted to ensure that we engage and consult as broadly as possible in the development of an acceptable set of protocols. So we have been continuously seeking and promoting common understanding and position in terms of interpretation of regulations, been looking at institutional mechanisms to highlight and discuss challenges of safety of agri-workers. We engage constantly with our Prestige Agri-Worker Forum to highlight issues pertaining to agri-worker challenges, which includes transport. And we've also, in terms of making sure that workers operate safely between provinces, we have also recommended in our protocols that essential workers traveling from the Western Cape to and from neighboring provinces undergo additional screening by the provincial health authorities of the receiving provinces at the relevant provincial borders. We know that in terms of protocols, there are permits that have to be in place, issued by the employer, and where the employer is not able to, the Department of Agriculture would assist. Such permit must indicate that the essential worker is returning home after completing seasonal work, ensure that seasonal workers are screened before undertaking the trip, and every essential worker obviously must have an identity document with him or her at all times. Further information within the protocols: must be sufficient hand sanitizer in each vehicle. Each essential worker must wear a face mask. Every driver of a vehicle carrying essential workers must be in possession of a permit indicating when he or she is leaving and when he or she must return back. Every seasonal worker returning to his or her usual home must have his or her employment contract with them. UI 19 forms for each seasonal worker must be in place whose contract has expired. We have made it sure that transportation of essential workers must always comply with the lockdown regulations as issued by the Minister of Transport. In terms of the actual protocol and with regards to the carrying capacity, Chairperson, this slide just highlights what our engagement with the Department of Transport and Public Works was in terms of ensuring 50% capacity. Now, we actually grappled with this for quite some time, but we were trying to ensure that our workers were transported safely and that there was sufficient social distancing between workers. We have been very consistent that we will not support any non-compliance in that regard. So I thought I'll just share what is incorporated around the carrying capacity in our transport protocol. It was obviously important in terms of our proposed interventions and enhancing awareness of the risks that there be synergies between provincial and municipal law enforcement for an improved and common interpretation of the legislation. And so the provincial JOC went a long way to ensuring that there was constant interface between the different law enforcement authorities. Extensive collaboration with Transport and Public Works, Community Safety, SAPS, the RCCs, that's coordinating committees within the districts as well as local law enforcement agencies to create awareness amongst the agricultural community, extensive discussions and engagements with producers and agricultural stakeholders, including the safe transportation of agri-workers, and to support the COVID-19 helpline, which the Department of Economic Development and Tourism have now made available, offering free professional occupational health and safety support, including assessment of worker transport. I thought, Chairperson and members, that it would be useful just to highlight how we respond in the event of an incident. Yes, we have a protocol, but incidents has happened. And so certainly in terms of the Touws River accident of 2020 that Member Maran also spoke about, we as a department received information regarding an accident between Touws River and the Dorens involving 28 agri-workers, and 8 agri-workers tragically lost their lives. We immediately deployed the community development officer in the district. We gathered the relevant information by engaging the farmer, Prestige Agri-Worker Forum members in the area and other sources in order to determine the type of assistance that will be required, as well as the details of all the agri-workers that were involved in the accident. And Member Maran also had a direct line to me to update me on some of the challenges. Support services that we had provided, I led a delegation to the families to express our sympathy around what had happened. We provided medical assistance, we provided trauma and counseling support to the affected families and workers who had survived the accident. We provided humanitarian relief in the form of food parcels through the Department of Social Development. We provided labor-related assistance in terms of engagement with the Department of Employment and Labor, and we also assisted towards providing funeral costs. The matter was also reported, formally reported, and confirmation was received that SAPS was investigating the matter. And as a department, our rural development officials followed up with relevant stakeholders in terms of providing further assistance and contact details for the future. So that's the very practical way, Chairperson and members, that we believe as a department, as a caring department, a compassionate department, how we need to respond. We're saying that the safety and dignity of agri-workers is at the heart of our ethos. Agri-workers render an essential service which implores all agricultural stakeholders to ensure the safety of agri-workers and a safe agricultural environment. All allegations are taken seriously and due processes are followed by the relevant mandated authorities. Agri-workers are agents for sustained food security and therefore a critical link in the broader value chain of agriculture. They must be acknowledged, appreciated, and protected. And improvements in safety measures reduce personal risks to the workforce, enhance production, and instill value and recognition for agri-workers, encourage investment, and we believe promotes a sustainable economic growth. Thank you very much, Chairperson and members. I may have gone a little bit over time. My apologies, but I trust my message is very clear. Thank you.
Good. Thank you, Mr. Jacobs. Mr. Jacobs, I see there's some feedback. I wonder whether there aren't two laptops close to one another. Thank you very much. It's better now. Honourable members, we are indeed in danger of running out of time. And if it's fine with you, I'm going to give over to Mr. Jannie Strydom, who's representing Agri Western Cape, to do his presentation. And if I could then ask honourable members to afterwards direct their questions to either Mr. Jacobs or to Mr. Strydom, I'll really appreciate that. If Mr. Strydom is going to take some 10 minutes, it will leave us with just about 40 minutes for the remainder of this meeting. So, Mr. Strydom, I know I'm a bit quick on you, but I do hope that you are ready and that you would be able to beam your presentation onto our screens as well.
Thank you, Honourable Chair and Honourable members of the committee and everybody part of the meeting. Now, Mr. Africa set the way in technology literacy, and now I'm struggling also to get it on. So Mr. Africa should come and have a cup of tea and educate me on how to get this on. I just had it on, yeah, and now all of a sudden it's gone. So if you just give me a minute, I'll try and get it as soon as possible.
It should be Jacob's coffee. It should Jacob and Julius.
I saw Mr. Africa has got a Dr. Africa's laptop that he has been using from the University of Stellenbosch. So I think it's who you know, not who you are.
So I think that's probably the problem. Let me just quickly check here.
Thank you. I know I was a bit quick on you. Honourable members, are there any questions to Mr. Jacobs at this point in time? Then we can give Mr. Strydom a bit of time. Honourable Maran, please go ahead.
Chair, yes. Chair, thanks very much. If I look to the presentations of Mr. Solomons and Mr. Jacobs, it speaks about the nows, what can be done immediately. The one of Mr. Solomons basically spoke about the sectoral determination and the compliance issues there, which is currently not enforced, but he made a commitment that his focus will be on those specifics. But also, Chair, if you look at the presentation of Mr. Jacobs, it basically focused on the national state of disaster, and when it comes to transport, what is under those regulations and what should be done. I've heard Mr. Ahmad have spoken about when it comes to your national transport regulations and the Act. It's not a thing of now. It will not happen immediately. It's not going to take a month. It might take years to enable some of the to get some of the changes, if possible. But the national transport regulations, Chair, spoke about basically your masks that workers before they get onto trucks, they should be sanitized, and also about the social distancing. And the President have said, and I've also agreed that the regulations are speaking about a 1.5 meter social distance. And I think, Chair, and I'm not sure now, because I've seen the presentation of Agri-Western Cape and also the presentation now of Department of Agriculture, which speaks about the numbers with they think that, so I'm not sure who's, but I believe it's the Agri-Western Cape's recommendations that's now been basically hijacked by the department. But as it may, Chair, at the beginning of the lockdown last year, and I think they actually table grapes with a dynamic young person with the name of Michael Foster, led basically a process where, can you hear me, Chair?
I hear you.
Chair?
I've just switched off my video.
Yes.
I hear you well.
Yes, just for them to comply with the lockdown regulations. And they have basically, Chair, come up also with similar numbers how they think workers should be transported. But we have seen, Chair, at the end of last year, the old habits basically returning, where you see workers basically transport in huge numbers, standing upright like sardines and so forth and so forth. But here we got a proposal within the department's proposal saying that only 50% of those workers should be transported. And it's basically in line what the transport regulations, lockdown regulations is saying. There should be those space between workers, and I think it should be enforceable. But Chair, also it creates a problem for the employer, where the employer now have to make additional costs to transport, for instance, 80 workers, where they normally transport them on one vehicle. It's now 2 trips. It was 1 trip. And my question to Mr. Daryl Jacobs is the same that we have done basically with when we have dealt with the second amendment appropriation bill, where we have basically allocated funds to the tourism industry. Is there any way that the department can look at how they can subsidize farm worker transport, because the burden can't only be those of the employer. It can't be, right? The obvious, the employer would want to shift some of those costs to the farm worker. But if you look at your national transport regulations, it says you can only charge a fee if workers are being transported by a vehicle that's been permitted to transport workers. So when it comes to trucks, it can't be the case. You can't charge them a fee. What's the possibility of the department looking into this particular issue and maybe then subsidize farmers within the Western Cape to just take that heavy burden from them? Thanks.
Thank you, Honourable Maran. If you will allow me, I'm not going to respond to that. I do hope that Mr. Jannie Strydom, who's representing those farmers and their interests, that I'll leave it to him to respond. I believe he is still struggling to beam his presentation onto our screens, and that Ms. Niekerk is assisting him as we speak. Thank you, honourable members. We've been going for 2 hours and 16 minutes. It's normally my habit to give us a short break after 2 hours, a comfort break. And if you don't mind, then I'm going to just temporarily halt proceedings. It's now 15:16. I do hope that we would be able to commence then at 15:21, 5 minutes from now. So, honourable members and our guests, if you would be so kind. Sorry, Jannie, I've just announced a short break of 5 minutes. So, honourable members, we'll be back at 15:21. Thank you. but it also allowed Mr. Strydom to sort out these IT problems. Mr. Strydom, thank you very much for being with us this afternoon. And thank you for your presentation. We look forward to that. And I do hope you feel most welcome.
Thank you, Chair. I just had it on, so now
we see it on our screens, but we see it not in presentation mode. Now it's completely disappeared from our screens again.
Okay, just give me a sec, please.
It's stolen.
There it is, not in presentation mode, but it's on our screens.
Okay, it should be there now.
Correct. Please proceed, Mr. Strydom. Thank you very much again.
Oh. Chair, thanks a lot for the opportunity again, and I really sincerely apologize for my computer illiteracy or incompetence. But let's get into the serious of the matter. I would really like, on behalf of Agri Western Cape, say thank you for inviting us. Like Honourable Maran rightly indicated, is that we do not represent all the farmers in the province, and I do support him in getting everybody's input, because this is absolutely a matter of great concern to us, of a great concern to the whole agriculture sector. And anyone who doesn't understand it or acknowledge that, really we cannot go along with those persons. So, Chair, just to run quickly through the slides, I just want to confirm that the health and safety, and I would like to include dignity of agri workers, remain priority for Agri Western Cape. And we have been working very closely with the department as well. And I just want to also state that we're also part of the forum that Mr. Jacobs referred to, and to give inputs and try and implement the regulations, and not only the regulations, but also the law, and communicate that with our members to abide the law. And we cannot, and I want to put it categorically this afternoon, Agri Western Cape will not support the contravention of any law by our members, and they know it. We constantly convene or convey that message to all our members. And just to carry on, we also regularly calls on our members to function within the laws. We've got a weekly newsletter that goes out, and we use that platform to reach all our members and to ensure the safety of the farm workers as far as possible when transporting the farm workers. So just to ask the question, why are trucks used to transport workers? And I would just like to emphasize the fact that farmers are actually there to farm, to produce, to use inputs, to cultivate and to sell the produce so that we can have food on our plates. So that's our main priority. And by saying that, I'm not shying away from the responsibility of the health and safety of the workforce. Not at all. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying, please bear in mind that we are not in the transport business, and that has been, as it has been alluded to, that the trucks and bakkies that might be used to transport farm workers, they are actually vehicles used in the process, in the production process. So it makes it really difficult. And I'm not covering for farmers. It's just, it's reality, and it's a fact that those vehicles, they are not buses, and that's why they're not obtaining, like Mr. Ahmed said, the licensing, the necessary transport licensing, because they're not registered vehicles for that. So we have a large number of farm workers, and we know it in the province, and especially with the fruit and grape season upon us now, there's a lot of seasonal workers also involved. So there's really pressure on the transportation of farm workers from their houses or their homes to the workplace. So And by using these type of transport mechanisms, it's basically, in some cases or some areas, the only way how we can assist the poorest of the poor to get to the workplace and obtain a wage then for themselves. So, and in some of those instances, there's no or just a limited, effective, reliable, and affordable public transport available. So we're really sitting with a huge problem. And that's why I welcome the previous speakers also saying, let's discuss this. Let's not fight each other. That will be my plea today. Let's not fight with each other. Let's rather sit around the table and see how we can resolve this issue, because the farmers need the farm workers, and the farm workers need the job opportunities. We know the figures in our country at this stage is not looking good. So please, let's have discussions on how we can resolve this absolutely devastating situation that we're in. Because every time if I get the news or I see the statement or I get the news of an accident, I really, it's not a nice message to receive. So. And then it was mentioned numerous times this afternoon also that it's a perception that all trucks transport workers are farm workers. So I'm glad that's on the table. And again, not shying away from agriculture, but normally it's just assumed that it's agricultural workers or agri workers. And that's not the case as we've stated. Chair, then I'm going to run through just some of the acts, but I think Mr. Kenny Africa did a sterling job in referring to all the legislation. I'm not going to stand still on all of these, but I think it's just important that we also acknowledge this, and these are basically the only ones or only regulations that we can refer to and at this stage. So that also makes it really difficult, because like you mentioned in that photograph that was shown, how stable is the structure, how firm is the cover. So there's all these subjective issues around and not clear indication and guidelines that we can use. So I'm not going to run through because of the time available. I'm just would like to go to our suggestions, and I mean, let's be honest with each other. We won't find a decent solution with just one discussion. So it's not a short-term solution. We need to sit and discuss this. It's a major issue, and we need to sort it out for the long term as well. And we need to find an effective, reliable, and affordable public transport where possible, or alternative for these transport measures that's currently in place. The question can be asked: are buses or taxis safer? And I really don't want to dwell on that area, but at least we've seen the accidents that took place since last year, April. The one between Toast River and the Dorings as well, and all the others that was mentioned, and then it's accidents. So, and we need to understand that as well. It could have been a bus or a taxi as well. But by saying that, I know on a truck you are for sure more exposed. It's like on a motorcycle versus in a car, you are more exposed. So the risks are definitely higher. And where we can mitigate that risk, we're really there to try and assist with that. So the interaction with the role players, I've already mentioned that, and I've said also that we're part of that forum that Mr. Jacobs referred to. And wherever, if we get invited to this meeting, wherever we can have discussions, Mr. Africa referred to or alluded to our meeting last year in Tulbagh, wherever we can, we want to interact and we want to try and find solutions for this problem. And then it was also mentioned a lot of times, and this came out of one of our policy committee meetings of Agri-Western Cape as well, where members just asked, please, can we ask for better policing or assistance from traffic and SAPs at the pickup points? I mean, that photo that was on one of the presentations of a person clinging onto the back of the truck, I mean, that's just unacceptable. Totally. I'm not very good at English, but that's the biggest word I can come up with. It's unacceptable. I mean, really, and that shouldn't be allowed. And what the complaint from some of our members and their drivers is that once they allowed the allowed amount of people onto a truck, when he gets into the cab and he starts driving, then people just jump on and cling to the back, and that's just a high risk. So we need that assistance, please. At those pickup points, we know the areas, it was mentioned previously, where there's traffic lights, where we can perhaps just assist these drivers as well, because one driver will not get 10 or 15 people that just jumped on the truck off that truck. That I can promise you. That's in practical just impossible. So please help us, and that's why I've put it in inverted commas, the illegal passengers as well, to keep them off the trucks. And then I'll come to the second point, the speed limit, also in our recommendations, that is in the next slide. So what we've conveyed to our members as well, just recently, since we've opened office again for this year, is that please assist us. We cannot allow any overload of passengers onto these vehicles of ours. So that's our request to them. And then the second point, I just want to get clarity in this meeting as well, that I hear what Mr. Africa also said about the 50% capacity and the 1.5 social distance. We just need to make sure that that also comply to private vehicles in the form of trucks and bakkies, because we know, my understanding of the regulation currently in place is that when in public transport, if you travel further than 200 kilometers, you should only be allowed to 70% carrying capacity, and within or less than 200 kilometers, it's 100% capacity. So my understanding there of in a bus, in a taxi, there's definitely not 1.5 meter social distance. So just to put that in perspective, so that we just compare apples with apples as well. But still, saying that, we did recommend to our members, because there's a lot of grey areas in terms of the carrying capacity, in terms of load capacity that the vehicle is registered for, these trucks, for example. So, I mean, there's no way, I've had numerous discussions with members, and they all agree, there's no way that you can load 8 tons of people on an 8-ton truck. I mean, you can just imagine what that load will look like. So we recommend as well, we recommend a 50% of that registered load capacity, and I'll get to the second or the table on my next slide, just as an indication or a guideline to prevent overload and to assist the driver not to overload a truck in a specific instance. So, and the workers we also recommend that they don't stand on the truck, if possible, that there's benches and that they sit. But if, like in the regulation stated, if there's a 350 millimeter high rails, then a person can also sit on the floor. But I mean, that's just, we're not recommending that. I've mentioned in my first slide the dignity of people as well. So the next slide, and Honourable Moran will also see this table that what Mr. Jacobs also shared it, and that just comes out of our discussions in the forum as well. So we also forwarded this table to our members, and this is what I'm mentioned or alluded to, is that let's take then half of the load capacity at least, and see how many people can we get onto a truck. And we've had discussions, practical sessions with some of our members, and even in lockdown 4 and 5, we had stickers, photos sent out. Michael from the Dorings gave us those pictures of if you put labels to guide the driver as well to how many people should be on a truck, and also then law enforcement, and they can also easily check the loading capacity. And then just our last point there, perhaps we should also look at the speed limit when a truck is loaded with passengers of at 80 kilometers an hour, because we know as soon as there's a swerve or whatever and bad weather conditions, it can contribute to more accidents. Chair, this is in short from my side. I would gladly take questions and see how we can assist. And that's my last comment. We would really like to assist to address this serious issue, and what Honourable Moran also alluded to, the cost implication for the employer if there's any assistance, if there's a decision made on how we need to solve it, and if there's any form of subsidies to assist the owner, the employers with these additional costs. Like I said in the beginning also, we're not in the transport business, and it really makes, it's a challenge to adhere to all, not to adhere to the law, but to address these issues from our side alone. So thank you very much for the opportunity, and I'll take any questions. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Strydom, and thank you, Honourable Moran. I recognize you. Can I just ask members that we be brief? We've got less than 25 minutes of this meeting left, and I would like us to try and formulate some resolutions at the end that will hopefully guide me as chair and the committee and the other role players as to the way forward. So, Honourable Moran, over to you.
Thanks very much, Chair, and also thanks to Mr. Johnny Strydom for his presentation. And also I want to thank him, Chair, for the attitude of us not having to fight with each other, but to sit around the table and to discuss and to arrive at solutions. You see, Chair, one of the problems that we're having with the in a way Agri-Western Cape and also some of the individual employees is that when an employer basically oversteps, they will close ranks around that particular employer. And that's why, Chair, we tend to generalize and basically badmouth every farmer that's there. And I can tell you, Chair, there's many good farmers in this country who will basically go all out to make sure that their workers are protected and they receive the best. There are many, but there are also many of those who are not willing to walk the extra mile. So when it comes to the transportation of workers, Chair, it will not assist if 50% of the employers comply and the other 50% who don't comply, the law is not enforced. Because then the other 50% will argue that if no enforcement is going to take place, there is no way that I, for instance, will go on and make extra costs. I will have to do extra costs to make sure that I comply. So then there will be lawlessness. So together with us, Agri-Western Cape, the Department of Agriculture, your law enforcement agencies, and I think one of the law enforcement agencies is basically absent in this meeting, and it should be here, is SAPS, to make sure basically that we enforce the regulations basically that's currently there. So just on the issue of 70 and 100% versus trucks transporting workers, and Chair, let me use this example. The president, for instance, when he spoke about gatherings, he was saying outside not more than 100 people, inside not more than 50 people. But he also said that when a venue can only accommodate 50 people, it should not be more than 50% of what the venue can take. Now, the same applies when it comes to transport. When the president has spoken about transport or the minister, they're speaking about those who are permitted to transport passengers. Therefore, 70% when it's long distance and 100% when it's local. But they also cover, Chair, other modes of transport like trucks by saying that there should be social distance. Now, a truck who are basically not permitted to transport workers should comply with the social distance. And my thought or my thinking, understanding was the proposals made by Agri Western Cape, which specifically says that on a 5-ton truck, this amount, 4-ton truck, this amount, speaks to that of social distancing. And if that's the case, Chair, I fully agree with them. That's the way basically that we should that we should go in to speak about specific numbers, how many should be transported, and it should be enforceable by our law enforcement agencies. Last thing, Chair, just for the attention of Johnny, you will find in many cases that workers are seated, like in the case of Tozer, in the case of Clubmates. But the seats on the trucks are not mounted on those trucks, and basically contributed to many of those serious injuries, or in many cases, maybe also to death. That maybe if there's a possibility that you can speak to your members when passengers or workers are seated to make sure that those seats are mounted. Me and Cameron went to visit one of these farmers, and he basically had a modified canopy that you put on a truck with a forklift, you removed it, but the seats are mounted, Chair, meaning that no one basically will be hit by a seat that's not mounted, that will fall off a truck, maybe hit the tar road or a pole, and then the cause of the death. Just from your side, whether you can speak to your members, we will also speak to our FASA and NAFU, that they speak to their members to make sure that they are compliant with those issues. Chair, let me stop there. Thanks.
Thank you, Honourable Moran, and thank you for your enthusiasm and your interest, Honourable members. It was actually Honourable Moran that raised this issue in a SCOPA meeting when he learned of the Clubmates accident almost 2 weeks ago. So thank you very much for your ideas and your participation. Can I just get an indication, members, are there any other honourable members before I give over to any other person that may want to make an input? If not, can I just ask, honourable members, we've learned about the possibility of regulatory changes. We've learned of the roles that some other role players which are outside of this committee's ambit or mandate can play, such as the traffic law enforcement, sharpening thereof, the introduction of national traffic laws, etc., which again we may be able to make an input to, but our ability is limited there. But I would like to ask of Mr. Strydom. Mr. Strydom, it seems to me, from what we've heard today, as if there are some relatively simple measures that may have quite a marked effect on the safety of workers. And I'm thinking of something, and Mr. Solomon's unfortunately had to leave for another appointment, something like making sure that the drivers of these trucks also get enough rest. You know, we're in the harvesting season. Quite often those drivers are senior farm staff. They work long hours. There are high physical demands on them. And then when it's uitval tyd, you know, they get behind the steering wheel of these trucks, or they are the first to get up in the morning to go and fetch farm workers. And I'm concerned that sometimes some of them may lose concentration because of tiredness. Now, also, if some of these drivers are regularly sent for eye tests, there are some institutions which will test people's eyes for free, you know, making sure that the trucks are in a roadworthy condition. I mean, it's not only in the interest of the safety of the workers, but also in the farmers' own interest to make sure that those trucks are roadworthy and that they do not become involved in accidents, even if these are minor accidents. So my question is just, Mr. Strydom, would you be able to appeal to your workers through those newsletters that you speak to, and just make them aware that there are some simple steps that may make an immediate difference in terms of the road safety of our workers, and to what extent can we take hands, to what extent can perhaps even the Department of Agriculture strengthen your hand in promoting those good practices. I see Mr. Chetty's hand. Mr. Chetty, if Mr. Strydom can first respond. Thank you.
Chair, thank you. Thank you for the questions, and thank you to Honourable Moran for his inputs there. It's duly noted, and we will definitely check the regulations as well regarding the 50%, because that table of ours, Honourable Moran, is based on regulations in lockdown 4 and 5 specifically. So that's why we're mentioning that there. But thank you very much for that input. Chair, your question, for sure, we will communicate it with our members. I just want to add to your list is that the policing again. Please, if we can, I think that's quite a short-term solution as well, or it can at least contribute where the workers are being uploaded, or where they gather at the pickup points and so forth. So with your permission, I will add that as well. But we'll definitely communicate these measures and add it to the protocol that we suggested to our members. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And then Mr. Chetty, if you could just introduce yourself. I believe you're representing Department of Transport.
Yes, Honourable Chair, it's actually Mrs. Chetty. Thank you for the opportunity.
Yes.
No problem, Chair, at all. Thank you for the opportunity. There are a few inputs and comments that I hope that you would allow me to share before we take the resolutions, because I think it would have an impact on decisions taken further on. With that being said, Honourable Chair, thank you to all the previous speakers for their inputs and their proposals on the current challenge that we're facing. But Chair, if you can just allow me a few minutes just to comment or give input. Chair, and I think this is an all-round feeling from all the members that are here today, that it is a multi-role player responsibility that we've got to adopt in order for us to sort or find solutions to the current challenge. So with that being said, Chair, it's also very difficult from a law enforcement perspective, and I appreciate and acknowledge the suggestions being made. There's a vast difference between monitoring and enforcement, Chair. In terms of us having resources to monitor what happens with the transportation of farm workers at strategic points, it makes it very difficult to monitor and not being able to enforce at the same time. With the lack of not clear and concise legislation that we're sitting with, all we have right now is Regulation 247 that speaks about the side protection as well as the rails and things that need to be fitted. It doesn't speak about standards in terms of durability of material that certain barriers and seating arrangements need to be made of, right? That is one point that I want to mention. So, in terms of passenger carrying vehicles, Chair, a heavy motor vehicle has never been regarded as a passenger carrying vehicle, and therefore it makes it easier to regulate and enforce from a traffic law enforcement perspective when it comes to taxis and your buses, because there we clearly have formulas in place, and that is legislated on how you can work out suitable seating and standing capacity. And now coming back to the DMA regulations, where at this stage, Chairperson, it's a 50% based on a protocol or a proposal. That part of how we can limit the amount of people that get loaded on has not been legislated. So it makes it very difficult from a law enforcement perspective if we're saying 20 people only are allowed to be carried in a particular vehicle. For our officers to actually enforce it in terms of issuing of summonses, etc. And in terms of our current duties, Chairperson, I think we all share the same vision to reduce fatalities on our road. That's our core function. But it's not only a case where we can deploy our resources only to look at farm worker transportation. We're sitting with challenges on attacks on heavy motor vehicles, which is things that have been shared, right through the media. We've got drag racing challenges, we've got protest actions, road closures. We're sitting even currently, Chair, with hiking trails being abused in the absence of proper DMA regulations and the capacity to handle those locations. It is a resource problem in terms of we render a 24-hour service, but we cannot be 24 hours at strategic locations, only focusing on farm worker transportation. But we're really trying our best to find an equal balance in terms of all the current law enforcement challenges that we face on a daily basis. To be added onto that, Chair, in terms of responsibility, we had a huge backlog in terms of abnormal loads that need to be transported to all parts of the Western Cape. We're trying to find the balance in terms of supporting the economy, so that's also become part of our daily resource, where we actually need to deploy 2 or 3 vehicles at a time to transport the abnormal loads. But within that challenges, Chair, we're really trying our best to address the current challenges, and we know the farm worker transporting has come on for a good couple of years. It's not only a problem that has arisen over the last year. It's something that's come on for many years. And in terms of the legislative working group, there's been proposals in terms of legislation that never got sanctioned by national. So it's not a recent problem. We're well aware of it being an old problem that, it makes law enforcement in the absence of clear and concise regulations and legislations very difficult to enforce. And I think one of the previous speakers also said, if we need to take this vehicle to the weighbridge, Chair, 10 to 1, the vehicle will not be overloaded. Because if you work out a goods carrying capacity versus a passenger carrying capacity, it's 2 different things. 68 kilograms gets allocated to a person. And how do you equally divide that and work out passenger carrying capacity on a heavy motor vehicle? Because currently it's not considered a passenger carrying vehicle. That is one of the challenges. And then, Chair, I'm very glad to note that Mr. Jacobs highlighted in his presentation, it's not only on selective routes. This has become a problem throughout the Western Cape in terms of the transportation of farm workers. So much so that we even have now a newer problem, a challenge. We've even got illegal immigrants that we found on 2 vehicles that was being transported between the Eastern Cape and the Western Cape, bringing in seasonal workers. So it's really a collaborative approach that we need to take even with our immigration services. And unfortunately, it's a matter that SAPS needs to handle because it's a criminal matter in this case, of which I think our previous speaker said the importance of having SAPS as a standing member on this forum so that, from an illegal immigrants perspective, they can give us an update in terms of what is happening with pending cases that our law enforcement officers have actually done during lockdown in terms of restricting the movements. And what is happening, Chairperson, is that illegal immigrants are being used as drivers of these vehicles. And also with the falsified documents, we don't even have proper records in terms of passenger information, which, as the previous speaker mentioned as well, that if there's a crash, it makes it very difficult to actually track and trace all passengers that were in the vehicle because it's falsified documents. So that's another challenge that's being added onto the farm worker transportation currently. And then, Chair, just to give you peace of mind in terms of the roadworthiness, we've got mobile vehicle testing units that Provincial Traffic makes use of. We've got 2 units in the Western Cape. And if we have to go back to statistics, Chairperson, we're really taking out and removing our unroadworthy vehicles off our routes currently. If there's an opportunity at some stage for us to provide this kind of information, you will see the sterling work being done by our law enforcement officers in terms of vehicles that have been suspended and taken off our routes. I understand and acknowledge that, yes, we can sharpen up in terms of the current regulations on where we can enforce. But, it's not only regulations that we need to look at for COVID purposes. What happens after COVID is done? Then it's a matter of a debate again in terms of the 50% capacity that's being proposed. So those are some of my inputs this afternoon, Chairperson. And I'm sorry that I took some of your time in terms of the resolutions, but I think it's really important to just acknowledge from my side as law enforcement, you know, we agree that it is a problem and a challenge that we really need to find possible solutions for, and that we will try our best from our side to be an active participant in terms of whatever our core responsibilities is in terms of reducing crashes and fatalities on our roads. Thank you, Chairperson.
Thank you, Ms. Chetty. And Ms. Chetty, if I understood Mr. Africa correctly, he said that the public can assist you in your law enforcement function by by reporting incidences of repeated transgression of the laws at the provincial traffic number. I can just personally testify that I found that number always to be highly effective. Quite often they pick up on the third ring, and the people that man that call center are really helpful and well trained. So congratulations on that, and where we can assist, we certainly would. Honourable members, we just now have a problem. I do think you will agree with me that we have learned a lot through this meeting. We've been addressed by numerous experts, and we've had a lot of angles. As I indicated at the beginning of this meeting, I think there are many other role players that are also burning to make their contributions and that would love to also approach us with their ideas on how the safety of our farm workers can be addressed. So what I'm going to propose, honourable members, because we really have only 3 minutes until 4 o'clock and we still have a set of minutes to approve as well, and that is to ask that members formulate potential or proposed resolutions. If you would be so kind to submit that to our procedural officer by not later than this coming Monday, and we will then come back to this agenda point on a future meeting. Perhaps that meeting will not be devoted in its full 3 hours to the issue of the transport safety of farm workers, but that we as a committee could hopefully take some binding decisions which will contribute to this complex issue, but hopefully come up with the kind of solutions that are within our ambit and that would already improve the situation for our Western Cape farm workers at least. So, honourable members, I trust that you will assist in this regard, and please, I think this is an issue that is heavy on many of our hearts. Please assist and help us to formulate that. Honourable Moran, I recognise your hand.
Chair, before we get to the resolution, I just think it's important to say something about what Ms. Chetty have said. I would have understand, Chair, outside of the COVID regulations, Regulation 247 will be the only one basically that speaks about the transportation of farm workers. I thought, Chair, when the Department of Agriculture basically made their presentations, they basically have spoken about what is some of the things that we can do under the regulations. But it seems, Chair, there's a difference of interpretation, and basically what the lockdown regulations is saying, and what I've heard now from the last speaker, basically, which make it impossible to implement or to enforce those issues that's in there. And I think, Chair, it asks for whoever is responsible for those regulations, basically, to put something more specific, Chair, so that it is clear for everyone and for them to be enforced. But, Chair, I just want to make the point, Chair, I think there's a difference of interpretations, because my understanding is there is some clear-cut issues, basically, that you can enforce, which is in the regulations, Chair. But I also agree, Chair, that we need to engage basically those who are responsible for these regulations to make some of the issues just more clear for all of us to grasp with it. Thank you.
Thank you, Honourable Moran. Ladies and gentlemen, it's now 4 o'clock. You've heard my proposal regarding the written resolutions. I also failed to welcome when they joined us some members from the Standing Committee on Transport and Public Works, including the chairperson of that committee, Mr. Dylan Mitchell, and I once also saw the name here of Mr. Derek America. Thank you very much. Can I ask that?
Thank you, Chair.
That honourable members, that you formulate resolutions, submit them to Ms. Niekerk. Obviously, we cannot adopt them in the absence of being able to consider them, but that we then come back to this issue at a future meeting. And if there are other role players that would like also to address us, please contact Ms. Niekerk. Please indicate what your field of expertise is, what you would like to contribute to today's debate, and hopefully we will be able to then come up with resolutions that will assist particularly the Department of Agriculture to improve the conditions of the very, very important farm workers and the role that they play in the Western Cape in ensuring food security, the economic recovery of the Western Cape, etc. So, honourable members, if in the absence of any other proposals, would you please be so kind to give support to this proposal?
I second, Chair. I second the proposal.
Thank you. Thank you, Honourable Maran. Any other proposals?
Support.
Good. Can I accept that it's generally agreed to then? Then, honourable members, I want to say thank you very much. Thank you for your presence. Thank you for your active participation. A particular word of thanks to those that presented to us here this afternoon. I can see from the presentations that you've spent a lot of time pondering over this issue, preparing your presentations for us, and please know that it is much appreciated. Thank you very much, and I wish you all a pleasant afternoon. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair.